Have you ever thought about suicide, but maybe you're just too ashamed to talk about it with anybody? Well, you're in luck because today's
Nice.
episode, we are going to talk about, is suicide ever okay? This is the
Hmm.
Existential Stoic podcast. I'm Randy. That's Danny. What's going on, Danny?
What's up, Randy?
I gotta say, Danny, I am actually the most anxious I've ever been about any episode we've ever made on this channel. Making making this episode, like it makes me nervous because I feel uniquely not qualified to talk about this. But
Huh.
on the other hand, it is a thought that has crossed my mind at times. I've talked about it with people, and that's been helpful for me. And there are resources out there, like there's the
Yes.
988 suicide and crisis lifeline for anybody who may be experiencing things. But I think it's something that we need to talk about because sometimes
Yeah.
shame can drive people to make a decision that they may not like.
Yeah, and I would also add too, I mean, you also worked in a profession where you performed mercy killings, euthanasia on animals, that's effectively what it is, which is similar. It's in the same wheelhouse, I think. Um,
Hmm.
because that's what we talk about in I taught this subject in biomedical ethics and ethics when you talk about, the ethics of suicide, euthanasia, assisted suicide, or physician assisted suicide. Um, and I think, I've also thought about it. I've also had friends who committed it. So I think it's a topic I think that touches a lot of people's lives, but it's also I think it's like a difficult topic to talk about morally too, because it's like, you know, when you think about it from a moral standpoint, it's like the person making the decision, if somebody does do it, it's like, what is when usually we talk about morality, we talk about like consequences, guilt, things like that. But usually, this is a situation that's very unique and odd, I think. But I think it also can change very dramatically in circumstance. We might think very differently of someone with a terminal illness, for instance, who's pain and suffering, choosing assisted suicide versus, somebody who might do it very young or something where, they have their whole life ahead of them. And there might be other avenues to say maybe help themselves or get better. So it's difficult, it is. And
Hmm.
then to even make it worse, I think there's even, or more complicated, I guess I should say, you know, uh, even like Camus talked about too, like philosophical suicide. So like even this other idea that's related to it, but not quite the same, where you're like suicide in like belief or meaning, I guess you could say
Dude,
yourself.
spiritual suicide.
Yeah. Yeah, that
Like
too.
I felt like I was doing that when I was working as a vet. It was totally against everything that I believed in. Even though it was
Yeah.
mercy killings of animals, it was everything I was completely against it, but I had to do it because it was my job. And so I was for a long time, I felt like I was committing spiritual suicide doing that.
That's a good way. I like that. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because that's kind of similar. Like when Cameron talks about philosophical suicide, it's like, it's recognizing like the absurdity of things or like being on the verge of like authenticity, recognizing, you can create your own meaning, but kind of being scared and going back to the old beliefs or to conformity. And so you're effectively, if you think about it, you're killing yourself, right? You're not literally, but
Mhm.
like metaphorically, you lose yourself. And so in a sense, that's what spiritual suicide can also be thought of too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I know it's something that's impacted both of our lives. And I remember when I was young, probably somewhere between 10 and 14 years old, one of my classmates commit suicide. And that was super shocking because nobody saw it coming. He was the
Yeah.
happy guy who was kind of friends with most people. Nobody really saw it coming. And then one of my very close childhood friends who I live right down the street from in adulthood, he commits suicide. And so like it's something, and you've had
Yeah.
experiences too.
Yeah, I have right after graduate school, actually, I had a friend who I went to graduate school, lived with for 2 years. He committed suicide that summer afterwards, which was shocking to all like the whole group of people that knew him. Like, and it was hard. It was doubly hard too because we were actually in grad school in Texas. So afterwards, everybody was in different states. He was in California. I was literally on the other side of the country, So like it was like I found out after the fact over the phone, and it's like it's hard too, I think, because and both for the people that are left, it's really hard for because you always ask questions, like could I have done something? Should I have done something else? Because there's always that sense in which like you could have helped them or maybe changed things, and that's also difficult, I think, to deal with. You know?
Yeah, that was one thing. I spoke with a counselor after one of my friends committed suicide because I I felt like I really wish he would have spoken to me. Not that I could have made
Yeah.
anything better, but just so that I could have told him how much he meant to me, you
Yeah.
know? At least, I mean, at least I could have tried, you know?
Well,
But it was,
it's funny that people say like it's normal to feel like even angry at the person. Like I felt that way when my friend did
mhm.
because I was like, he didn't reach out. There was a group of people that knew him really well. Like he didn't reach out to us. He didn't talk to us, and everybody was busy. So it wasn't, I'm not blaming him or anything, but like, it's hard because it's like, and it's not always clear, especially when you're not in proximity to someone. It's not, you don't always see when they're pulling away either. So it really makes it hard and shocking, and difficult to deal with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so like, we both mentioned how it would have been nice to talk with them. And I think that's an important thing because like one thing that probably stops people from talking about suicide, like I know times when the thought has crossed my mind, I was embarrassed, I was ashamed of talking to it. And I remember there was one time where we met up and I was like, dude, I was thinking about hurting myself. And he's like, yeah, lots of people think that all the time. And like all of a sudden the shame vanished, you know? And I
Yeah.
was just like, oh, really? That's just the thought that comes up. And it's like, yeah. And I think another important thing, at least for me, was to recognize the difference between like actually wanting to die and not wanting to live. So like
Oh, that's
that,
a good distinction. Yeah. I think I like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
because it was like the times when I was in the most pain, it was because I thought the pain was going to be there forever and
Yeah.
I couldn't deal with it. It wasn't that
Yeah.
I actually wanted to die. Like I didn't want to not live, but it was just I wanted the pain to go away. So that was one thing that I learned from a counselor that I talked to that was if you didn't have this pain right now or this difficulty right now, would you still want to die? And
I think,
oftentimes the answer is no.
yeah, right. I think that's a good one too, because I think I had the same thing. Like in the times in my past where I've thought about it, it's like you think those difficulties are going to be there forever. And so you project forward. And when you project forward, but you project forward with those difficulties or with that pain, it seems insurmountable. And it seems too hard. Like, I don't want to do this for 10 years or 50 years or whatever. And so it seems logical to make that, to think then, oh, this, it was just ended. But when you really think about it, it's like, well, is this really going to be here forever though? Isn't there ways out? Isn't there things I can do? Isn't there stuff I might be able to, fix or change? And I think that's the big distinction. Like I remember when my brother-in-law had cancer and he went on hospice. I remember him saying to me, this was about like 5 days before he passed away. He said, like he was like, I'm just sick and tired of being sick and tired. And that's a very different circumstance, right? Because like he knew this isn't gonna, there is no 10 years, 20 years down the road. The future was very short and this wasn't gonna go away, right? It's there. This is it. This is reality. So I think there's a huge distinction between those two types of cases where like, you have something that will probably or might be able to go away or might be able to be fixed versus something that can't. And I think we often like confuse it and think the one is the other, the other is the other, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And like I can totally sympathize with people who are feeling it because sometimes problems
Yeah.
just seem like they won't end. And one thing that I've found
Dude,
particularly
life's hard.
helpful,
It is. Like
dude,
life's
and
hard
and
and it
it
sucks sometimes.
yeah, and
Totally
it's like
does.
all the things that we did to make life easier kind of just made life more difficult. Like
Yeah.
technology,
Yeah.
social media, all these things just made life more difficult. I actually have an interesting fact about social media, but I'm saving that for a little bit. But
Nice.
one thing that I found that's helpful because even though I don't really think about suicide anymore, but I still sometimes get depressed, or even just the fear of becoming depressed. Like
Yes.
that's the worst, where I'm not even depressed, but I'm scared. I'm like, uh-oh, is this it coming again?
Yeah.
And that's enough to like send me for a few hours until I can just calm down. But one of the things I found really helpful is the Alcoholics Anonymous Just for Today thing, where just for
Yeah.
today, I'll live through this day only and not try and solve all my life's problems today. I can do for 12 hours what would seem ridiculous if I had to keep it up for a lifetime. And it's a really good thing. You can just look up AA just for today and you'll find it online. But that's like a great way to just get through today because oftentimes it is getting through today. And even it's just things like being hungry or being tired or being angry or
Tired.
whatever
Yeah.
or lonely or whatever it is. These are the things that could just trigger you to where you're going to make a permanent solution for a temporary problem.
Well, you know what, too, I know in my own experience, and I know this has been true for other people too, is like when you're in that, when you're depressed or whatever, or things aren't going well and you're thinking about it, you're also, your imagination's doing that thing where it's projecting forward. And then you do this thing where you think like, well, so making changes isn't worth it because things aren't ever going to change. And so you actually play against yourself the whole time. It makes it worse. And so I think one of the things that was really helpful for me too was like, and I know it's hard in the moment, it's like very difficult. I'm not saying this is sucks and it's not easy and that takes time to work on, but like also just recognizing that like there are little things you can do and start doing those things because once you do make one positive change, no matter how small, it changes the whole situation and you break that false imaginative belief that things won't ever change or that they're out of your power or out of your control entirely or there's nothing you can do. You show yourself there is something you can do and that can really dramatically change things. It doesn't make it easier necessarily and doesn't make things super, like it's not all of a sudden like flip totally, but it gets you out of that immediate threat and then you can address things as you need to.
Yeah. Um, so there's two instances that I've read about. One was Buckminster Fuller, the guy who created the geodesic dome, and the other one was, I think his name is Henry James, the Principles of Psychology. I think that was a book he wrote. But anyways, both of them, I read about how they were both so miserable in their life that they contemplated taking their own life. And this was like when they had done nothing with their life. They were a complete failure. Their families were just fed up with them. They had just amounted to nothing. And they had both come to the point where they're like, I'm just going to take my own life. And they were like, you know what? I'll give it a year. You know, I'm gonna give it a year. I'm gonna do the best I can to make the most of my life in this year. If nothing comes from it, then I will just off myself in a year. And both of them, one went on to create the geodesic dome and a whole bunch of other stuff that he's known for, like buckyballs and whatever. And then the other one went on to become like one of the greatest psychologists or psychiatrists, something like that. So, I mean, granted, this is like an N of two in terms of cases, but I
Yeah.
also think that time is something that's important because problems come and go. They're like
Yes.
they're like the waves, you know. But
Yeah.
when the wave is cresting, it feels like it'll be there forever. And this is something that I saw when I worked as a veterinarian because I was working in emergency a lot of the time. And so this is like the worst moment. It's like
Yeah.
your animal just got shot, just got hit by a car, just collapsed in the house, whatever it is. And you go in the middle of the night, you're woken up in the middle of the night, you go to this emergency hospital that's ludicrously expensive. You have no money in the
They
bank.
are crazy expensive. Yeah,
Yeah,
dude.
yeah. You have no money in the bank. And all of a sudden, here's this animal you love, like the one creature on earth
Yeah.
that actually cares about you. And you have to make a decision like, should I mortgage the house to actually do something for him? Or do I have to euthanize him? And that was the worst thing because I saw a lot of cases that probably if the people had more time, they could have made a better decision. But their animal
Well,
was in pain. Something needed to happen quickly. The resources weren't there and time was lacking. So if you can give yourself more time, that's something you definitely have to do.
no, I think that's a great one too, because I think that's also part of the like it's like it is like a mental trick we do to ourselves when it happens. And when you're depressed, it's almost like it is like being in like a weird like mental fog or trap or something, right? You have to figure out a way to break out. And I think, time is a great one. Like give yourself time because like, you got to think that that decision ends everything. Whereas what's the harm of giving yourself a little more time, right? Like really, you can always do it later, essentially. So that's final. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
serious, right? That's final. So give yourself some time because that gives you other opportunities, other options. And alternatively, I noticed for myself too, was like one of the things that really helped me, at least now, especially was like once I recognized that those thoughts were real and all, and like when I was struggling, like once I changed things around to really make an effort to work on it to protect myself from getting to that point again. Because I think that's also really important. Like, not like sort of slacking off essentially, because it's easy to do so, right? We take everything for granted. We get super comfortable in situations, even crappy ones, because they're normal to us. And then it makes it really hard to do anything. And we make ourselves out to feel powerless because it's scary to take responsibility and accountability. It's scary to admit to ourselves that maybe I need to do something to fix the situation, or maybe it's not the world's fault, maybe it is mine, or maybe like in some part I am accountable for myself. It is terrifying.
Yeah, that's a great one. I'm glad you mentioned kind of having the positive habits or whatever to help keep this at bay, because the times when I was most depressed were times when I had no positive habits.
Yeah,
Like over
yeah,
over
right.
the past 5 years or so, I've worked very hard at finding what helps me feel good and what doesn't. And so cultivating
Yeah.
more of the things that make me feel good. And oftentimes in the short term, they don't feel good. Like
Nope.
ice baths in the short term are insanely painful. But they've done studies with ice baths, cold therapy, and actually 7 minutes in an ice bath is like the actual recommended length because you get a double dopamine hit in there in 7 minutes. And
Huh.
so they've done studies with people who are depressed, and that actually does help brighten up everything. I remember there was an Andrew Huberman thing that I listened to, and I think I sent you the little image about
Yeah,
kind of, yeah. So basically, it was a picture of this guy who was, it showed his baseline, and then he was lifting and he was in pain, and then his baseline went back up, and then he was in an ice bath and he was in pain, and he was meditating, he was in pain. But overall, his baseline was higher because he had these moments of pain. And then on the other side, it had the person who's seeking pleasures. And so they were sitting around and they'd play video games and they get a spike of pleasure, and they'd eat candy and they get a spike of pleasure, and they do drugs and they get a spike of pleasure,
yeah.
but their baseline is a lot lower because they're just seeking the highs. So something
And
that
when you
he
seek
saw
the
from,
highs too, it keeps going up, right? Like that
yeah,
level keeps going up, and the base goes lower and lower. So it's like, yeah,
yeah,
you
it's
get this
diminishing
disparity.
returns on each one. And so like the kind of the moral from that video that I saw was, seeking pleasures isn't the problem, but it's the getting of pleasures without putting in work that's the problem. And
Yeah,
so nowadays we live in a society where it's very easy to get quick pleasures. And so it's almost something where I have a lot of activities that I put in my life to help kind of with the long-term pleasures, even though they're short-term pains sometimes, because this will help pay off in the long run.
well, it's tough too because I know, even when you do try to like go to the doctors for help and stuff, the impulse is to do something immediate, like give somebody a medication or a pill or something to solve. And sometimes you do need that. Sometimes you need like a assistance now to get to that next stage, but you also need that other side of it, which is the work you have to put in. And I think the problem is that we're so used to like immediate fixes, instant pleasures, instant gratification that we think like this pill's magic and it'll fix it, but rather than doing anything else. And the problem with that is that, like, just like you're saying, like you'll end up needing more and more of it in order to keep that same level. And so it's really not fixing anything, you're just masking it, basically.
Yeah,
And I think
yeah.
it's hard though, you know, it is very
But
difficult.
but it's really important to talk to somebody because it,
Yeah, that
like
helps.
when you're in those mind states, you are not the person to be having a conversation with, because
Nope.
that's not the time to talk to yourself, because uh you have no perspective. Like literally your
Yeah.
perspective, you're completely narrowed down. You have no perspective. You're not the person to be talking to. So finding somebody that you can talk to, someone that you can trust, maybe a friend. If not a friend, maybe you go speak with a counselor, maybe you go to a hospital, maybe you go to a church, somebody that you can talk to.
Call the hotline, whatever. Yeah.
Maybe you go to an AA meeting. I mean,
Yeah.
they're a great resource because they're a bunch of non-judgmental people who will listen. And guess what? They probably have worse stories than anything
Yeah.
you've seen in your life,
Definitely. They definitely do.
and they're able to laugh about it. But it's only because the shame surrounding it is not there. You
Yeah.
know,
Well, that's
it's a
just it. You
totally
have to be
welcoming
honest about it,
environment.
right? You have to
Mhm.
be honest about it. You have to just say it. And I think also too, there is power in just saying it, like saying to somebody you trust, or like even just calling somebody on a hotline and saying it on the phone, like to like the 988 or whatever, like just saying like, I'm thinking about killing myself. Because like when you say that, one, they can help you because now somebody who's not in that mind state can actually help you find resources and think about this and think through it. But also you put it out there and you kind of immediately does get rid of some of the shame because now it's not something that you're dealing with by yourself. I think there is a
Mhm.
big side of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's no longer a secret.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
that is a great point.
it's one of our biggest problems too, though, is we do tend to think of like mental health issues as shameful, and it's something that we should, and it's stupid, but that's the case. And so you have to kind of, but the funny thing is as soon as you talk to people, you realize like probably everyone you know has been through at least maybe not the same extreme or whatever, but something similar and has definitely thought about it. Because my experience is everybody has. And so like, at least to some degree. And so, I think it's important because you realize like when you're feeling that way, at least I know I felt this way. Like you feel like, oh, it's only me. I'm unique. These are only my experiences. But in reality, we're human beings. Other people definitely had similar experiences.
Yeah, I remember there's a motivational video I used to listen to. I think it was called Vision or something like that. But Eric Thomas was talking in it, and he was saying how there were many times that I thought about committing suicide, but I just had to keep saying to myself, keep believing, keep seeing, not what you're seeing now, but what you're seeing in the future. And like, it was crazy because when I heard that, I was like, hang on, somebody else is going through this like many times? That's crazy. How is that possible? Because
Yeah.
it's like so taboo,
Yeah.
but it's something that probably everybody thinks about.
Well, you know what I think the problem is too. I'll say this from my own experience. I don't want to like cloud anybody else or anything, but like I think too when you think about it, it seems, at least for me, it seemed like the easier thing to do at the time, if that makes sense. Because like again, you think it's going to be so hard to make changes. You think it's going to be so difficult to overcome whatever you're facing that this would just be easier. And we're so used to instant gratification. We're so used to dealing with things in kind of a half-assed way that we don't really address anything. That that just seems almost logical. Whereas when you really step back and look at it, it's absurd, and it's really, if you address it and face it, there's so many more opportunities you can have in the future. I think the reason why I mentioned there's like other cases like severe illness and stuff is that I think those are different situations, and it's important to recognize that, right? Where you have reality of the future is very different. Where somebody's terminally ill and they know that like, they have a week or whatever. That's very different from, you know, whatever my problems are and I'm depressed right now, but I potentially have, otherwise I'm in okay health.
Mm-hmm.
Mentally I need to fix things, but otherwise, there's a big difference.
Well, here's another thing. So a lot of times the thought is that suicide will solve the problems.
Yeah.
Like people
Isn't
have
that
these
funny?
problems, their life sucks, and they think suicide will fix it. Well, what happens if it doesn't? That's the other thing. I once heard that, and that blew my mind because there was some guy talking about the voices in his head and how he had thought about suicide for it. And then somebody said to him, "Well, what happens if the voices don't go away after you kill yourself?" And it's like, oh, like imagine that. Like you have this life, has its problems, lots of things suck. But you know
Yeah.
what? There are probably some decent things about it. Like, I don't know. Maybe there's one person you like seeing every once in a while. Maybe you're a little bit comfortable somewhere. Well, what happens if you kill yourself and then you still have all your problems that you want to avoid, but all those little comforts are now gone and you have to start over again, but you just have all your problems and everything else is new. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good way to look at it because it is, right? We think it'll solve everything at that time, at least when your mind's like that, you think it'll solve everything. But like, how do you know? And is that really a solution? That's the other side of it. But I think the other thing too to keep in mind too is I think when it does happen, at least for me too, was like reminding yourself there's still opportunities. Like that's important too because I know like it feels like there is none, when you feel at your worst. And that's part of why you have to do the work afterwards too, is to remind yourself that there are opportunities and like there's still potential. So to do that now would be a disservice to you because you're not trying everything else to fix it and make things actually better.
Yeah, it's like the whole thing about learned helplessness, where like
Yeah.
Martin Seligman did the experiments. I think there were dogs or something in a cage where they electrified the floor, and
Yep.
certain dogs could like hop off the thing and it would stop, but other dogs would just get electrocuted no matter what they did. And these dogs that just got electrocuted, eventually they just laid down, like
Yeah,
because
they
there was
stopped
nothing they could
yapping.
do.
They stopped trying to get away. Yeah.
Yeah, but they showed all the signs that humans show when they get depressed, and so they found out that like when there's situations in your life that you think you have no agency over, it can have that same feeling. You get depression because you think no matter what I do, it's not going to make a difference.
Yeah.
And that may not be true.
On that side note too, yeah, it feels over. It feels like you're trapped like that. Like you can't, there's no way out. And I think in those situations too, not only talk to somebody about like obviously what you're thinking, but also like what are your problems? Talk to somebody about them. put them in the world and out of your head so that you can actually start thinking about how to address them. Who knows? Maybe somebody can actually help you with them. Maybe, I mean, usually that's the case, depending on what they are, but there's always a way around. And at least that way you get them in the world and then they can be addressed. They're actually addressable rather than just staying in your head and being demons that you're fighting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So another interesting thing is age. So I was looking up some statistics on suicide, and it's the second leading cause of death in adolescence. It's actually the first leading cause of death in young girls. And uh, however, as a whole, men are more likely to do it, and actually, the elderly are the most likely to do it. But
Yeah,
here's a
but are the
very
reasons different though then?
I
Because
think
like
I think for yeah, I think for the elderly the reasons are different.
yeah,
Uh,
that would make sense.
so the interesting thing to note is the other day I overheard somebody saying that suicide rates have spiked, and this is actually how I got the idea for the episode.
Hmm.
That said suicide rates have spiked since social media came out, and I was like that makes sense, but let's see
Yeah.
the data. So I actually
Yeah.
looked this up, and so pretty much until about 2005, the rate of suicide was about 10 in 100,000.
Okay.
Okay. And it had been that way for as long as it was measured, roughly around that number. Okay.
Okay.
And then in, until 2005, it was pretty much flat. Facebook was invented in 2004. Okay. So the year before that. After that, it spiked almost 50%. So now
Uh,
it's at over 14 out of 100,000.
wow, it's a
So
huge increase.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So if you have these feelings that are coming up, totally normal because of the age that we live in nowadays.
And what's funny too? I get the young kid thing or the adolescent thing because when everybody's been young at one point, things seem way more serious than they are because you don't have a good metrics for that yet. You're young, you don't have a lot of experiences. So they seem like everything seems like the end of the world, literally, right? And social media, everything feels more real, I think, too. And you don't know what your potential is, so you don't know how to like manage that. And I think that's why, like, that in those cases, especially talking to somebody, but also turning that crap off too. If you, like shutting, I mean, I think this is also important, but it's also hard, which is like, if you're struggling, turning things off while taking a break, admitting to yourself that it's okay not to engage, to just not talk to anybody. Who cares? Because if you're having like problems, then just deal with that first and then move on, and don't worry about like everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I still have not found a single study that says that there's a benefit to your life from using social media. Every single study is like this ruins your life. But
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, so I guess
It's interesting, it's funny that too, because it's like all it does. I mean, it's like it's hard. I mean, I know I was reading a report on I wonder if that was the same one. They were talking about was it, I think it was like 11 to 14-year-old, especially females they're talking about with social media and the detriment. And it wasn't just suicide, but it was a lot of other things, like eating disorders, things like that. And it's because we're not necessarily prepped to deal with that. And it's a lot of information. It makes us create this really false representation of what everyone else has. And therefore, our comparisons to our own life are totally skewed. And like we've mentioned this before, right? Back in the day, when before all this stuff, like you had your basic community to compare yourself to, which generally speaking, everyone would have been roughly the same level. So it's like, there wasn't these wide disparities. You get on social
or
media and
if
you're
or
seeing,
if you had like an exceptionally beautiful person, you would have
yeah,
one of them in your village,
yes.
you know?
Or somebody who had like a little bit more wealth or something. It'd be one person, not,
Yeah.
but the way we view it, it's like you see movie stars and these CEOs, you see everybody with all this stuff, and it's like it seems like you have nothing. But in reality, like it's a very skewed perception of reality. And I think that's the other problem. So you do have to
So
shut that out, you do.
yeah, there's this book called Factfulness, which I read it because Bill Gates, his testimonial or whatever was on the cover, and it was like one of the best books I've read in my life or something like that. And I was like, oh, well, if he says that, it's probably a good book. And so I read it, and it was interesting because it takes a look at how people compare in terms of the world. And so like it puts
Hmm.
people into four different tiers. And so basically, you're in the upper tier if you have a motorcycle or like a motorized transportation,
Yeah.
running water, a bed, and a stove.
Oh, yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you're in the upper tier, you're in the elite,
Yeah.
and everybody in America is like, what?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
because like that's literally the upper tier of humanity in the world.
Yeah.
And but it's like the perspective that we lack growing up in places where, you grew up in a pretty decent life, but you just didn't have the brand name products, all the money, all the dream, yeah, all that stuff.
Well, and that's what makes it hard, I think, is we get these skewed perceptions of what we need or what's necessary. And the problem is too, we're always looking outside. Like we never make it about like, it's never about like, well, I need to, develop skills, grow, get mentally healthy. We're always looking at I need more stuff. I need a bigger house, this crap. And it's like that's why things are wrong. It's like, well, maybe if you work on yourself first, and this is not easy, don't get me wrong. I know it's hard. It was hard for me to realize this too, but like if you work on yourself first, that stuff will all come anyway, because you'll also be happier regardless. So you realize you don't need, like, it also kind of nixes a lot of the things that you thought you needed in the first place because you don't really need them. That was a way to fill a hole that was in you instead of actually just addressing the problem.
Oh, yeah. So I guess we didn't really talk about the philosophical aspects of it.
Hmm.
So you taught this stuff in your courses about assisted suicide, different things like that. And I know, so like in veterinary medicine, there's euthanasia, but technically it's homicide because
Well,
the
it's mercy
animals the
killing. That's
animals
the
never do it to themselves.
no, no.
Like,
Technically, it's
yeah,
yeah, we usually call it like it's like mercy killing, right? Because it's like
yeah.
people forget that in ethics, right? Killing is not in and of itself wrong morally. Like we tend to think that way, right? Because usually when we think of it, we think of like, murder, like in the sense of like shooting someone in the street or something, right? You think of that kind of stuff. But like ostensibly, right? Like there's nothing necessarily wrong with it. It's the situation, it's the circumstances that make it wrong. And so normally when ethicists talk about it, assisted suicide or like euthanasia, the distinction just being whether the patient themselves takes their own life or the doctor assists, right? Um, Usually, as long as certain conditions are met, it's viewed as okay. So, namely, that they can make the choice themselves, competently, so that nobody's being forced. And obviously, animals are a little different there, but we'd say it's in their best interest, right?
Mhm.
And that there's like a real reason for it beyond just like I think things are bad now, namely like some real medical condition that's gonna more than likely make the remainder of life both short and very painful and difficult. And so I think this kind of fits with what we've been saying, which is, like if, when we usually imagine the future, for most of us, when we think about it, we're projecting a lot and making things up and we're thinking things are just insurmountable, but we can make changes. Whereas, you know, if you're dying from cancer and there's no cure, I mean, that's how it is. And so there's a big difference in those two situations because the future is very different. So I think thinking about that in those terms, like what does the future really look like? And you know what kind of real like physical pain exists there or hurdles, and is that justifiable then?
Yeah. And even with the assisted suicide, usually there's some type of time gap between when you want to do it and when you can actually do it, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh God, the restrictions are like the actual legal restrictions are crazy. This is from memory, so they're probably even more difficult than this. But I know you have to submit a request for it, ask for it, then you have to get a second opinion on your actual case. Then you have to like also see somebody like a mental health expert, talk to them. Then you have to submit it in writing, if I remember correctly. Then there's a time gap, and then they basically ask again, and then you can get prescription for a dose of the lethal medication, and then you also have to administer it. So there's like plenty of points in the process, both to make sure the person's like not being forced. So like the fear is too, you don't want somebody like want somebody's inheritance or something, right? You don't want people to
Mm-hmm.
obviously greed and stuff like that. So there's plenty of points within the process where the individual can make their decision, right? And that's the idea. So it's up to them. And it's recognized that, in these circumstances, it's okay because it's look, I mean, do we necessarily have to just constantly go to the hospital and fight these things over and over when, why do I have to do that? I mean, I think that's a fair thing to think about.
Hmm. Yeah, so like right or wrong, there is no answer. But if you look at the legal assisted suicide, I mean, look at how many different perspectives they have to get. Look at all the
Yeah.
time that elapses between there. Look at the commitment. You have to write about why this is actually important to you. And so like all of those things would be factors to consider because uh yeah, in both of the cases of my friends who commit suicide earlier, nobody knew what was coming. They
No,
didn't they didn't
exactly,
seek
right?
perspective from anybody. They didn't give it, at least since seeking perspective, they didn't give it any time that anybody knew about. So a lot of those things could have helped. Yeah, definitely.
I think one of the most difficult things too is like if you know somebody that's done it, if you've thought about it, whether you're like on the side or whether you're the person that's thought it, you have to be compassionate too, and it's hard. Don't blame yourself whether you weren't there for the person or whether there's no reason to. It's done. You know, don't blame yourself for thinking those things. Forget about shame. It doesn't really matter. You know, it's the problem is I think we get caught up in all these valuations and stuff that at the end of the day don't really matter. I think you're better thinking about what can I do that's productive? What can I do that maybe will change these things that make things better? And so, yeah, I think don't worry about the other stuff.
That's a great suggestion, Danny. There's a book called Self-Compassion by Dr. Kristen Neff, which talks about that. Uh, how basically like this is a moment of suffering.
Yeah,
And in life, there's suffering. Lots of people go through it. So, like, if you're having these thoughts, if you're in pain, if you're depressed, whatever it is, this is a moment of suffering. Lots of people experience it, uh, and it sucks.
yeah.
But how in this moment can you be the kindest to yourself? What can you do in this moment that's the best for yourself? And so, yeah, I think that's really important. I think, reaching out, like we mentioned, there's now this suicide hotline. So you don't need to remember the whole number. It's just 988. And it works, I think, in many countries, but at least in the US. Uh, but,
And
just looking online. Yeah.
yeah. And the other really hard thing too, I think to keep in mind is, if somebody does do it that they weren't doing it to you. Like
Mm.
that's the other thing, and I mean, I think it's hard to keep in mind, and they had a reason, whether it was right or wrong, it was their reason. Yeah, I think this is like that's why I always think it's a really weird question from a moral perspective because, I know there's some like religious aspects to it that some people might have with faith, but just from a purely moral perspective, I don't see any. It doesn't make any sense to me. Think about it. I think you think about the things around it. Like if you're talking about like assisted suicide, like how do we do it safely? And so that the person's making this themselves, right? But like otherwise, it's an
Yeah,
event.
this is a bit of an aside, but I was actually thinking about this yesterday. How like a lot of the religious obligations were meant to increase population size
Yeah,
because 2000
totally.
years ago there was not enough people and the goal was to increase population size. So
Why do you think
what
they
were the
said
thing?
don't eat this or that, right? Because those things cause illness. Like,
Well, also don't commit suicide.
yeah,
Don't have homosexual intercourse. uh like all these things that would have not created more people,
but we have
these
like
were
9
all
billion
things that you
people,
cannot do. Yeah.
so we're
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, so we're okay. But anyways, if you're
That's a good
listening and
point,
if
though,
you're
right? Yeah,
yeah,
it is. It's true.
yeah, yeah, if you're listening and if you're having any type of suicidal thoughts, just know that we care about you. And it's something
Absolutely.
that we've both experienced, lots of people have experienced. There's someone out there who can help you with it. And so there's the hotlines there, there's friends, family,
And it
and
definitely
whatever Danny's going to
sucks.
say.
It definitely
Yeah.
sucks. Yeah,
Hmm.
that's it, right?
Yeah.
It's hard and it sucks. It's like, but it can get better.
Hmm. Yeah, there's no, in the moment it feels like there's never going to be a way out, but it's just one of those things that sometimes you just have to endure.
Oh, it's interesting. One last point.
Mm-hmm.
Utilitarians, when they look at it with like euthanasia and stuff like that, they look at like, the own individual's evaluation of their own life. So you think of like as, quality of life. Is my life have quality? And so you look at the potential future versus like the actual physical pain and all now, and the projected forward physical pain and time. And I think that's a good way to kind of think about it. Like, so if you think of somebody, again, using like terminal illness, like my brother-in-law, when he passed away right on hospice, he had a very short amount of time, a lot of pain. So yeah, okay, that's case, whatever, fine. quality of life, there's probably very little potential for it. If you're 18, 25, 30, thinking about it, but otherwise, you probably need to get some help. And, but looking forward, probably the potential for quality of life is still there. You just don't see it.
Mm, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So that in a nutshell answers the question, at least from us. This is just two guys talking, but
Yeah.
is suicide ever okay? And yeah, this is the Existential Stoic podcast. Thank you so much for listening. You can check us out on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. We love you guys. Don't do anything rash today. And we'll catch you next time. I'm Randy. That's Danny. I'll see you later, Danny.
Later, Randy.